Let's talk about market structures more. So market structures is heavily dependent on the number of firms in the market, the nature of the product, the ease of entry for new firms, and the control of a pricing. And knowing which type of market structure your business is in will help you make more strategic and simply better decisions in general, whether these are pricing decisions, cost decisions, expansion decisions, etc. First of all, perfect competition is a type of market structure where no single firm has significant market power, and as a result, firms must accept the market prices. There is a very easy entry and exit for new companies, and this is all focused on short-term profits, but there are no long-run economic profits. And to illustrate, a very clear example is the agricultural market. And to make it even more specific, consider the market for wheat and corn. These are staple products within most diets around the world. And so there is a very high demand for these kinds of products. But as you can imagine, a consumer wouldn't really bother whether they buy the wheat from farmer A or farmer B, because there's not much difference in wheat or corn. In other words, this is a market structure in which businesses can't really distinguish themselves. There is no significant market power. And in addition, there's a relatively easy entry and exit. There is not a lot of technical know-how that a business in this sort would have to acquire first in order to enter the market. But basically, all the knowledge and all the technology is out there for a farmer to start harvesting their own wheat or corn. A monopoly is the exact opposite of perfect competition. This is where a single firm is the sole producer for a product. As a result, there are high barriers to entry, such as startup costs or patents. Typically, you'll find monopolies in the technology fields where there's already one major monopolic power that has significant technological know-how, patents, etc., in order to maintain their own position within the monopoly. As a result, a monopolist has pricing power. They can set the prices for their own products. And this leads to higher profits at the expense of consumer surplus. So obviously, as you can imagine, this is not a very efficient market structure, because this essentially leads to higher profits than would be the case in a perfect competition. And once again, to illustrate, a key example aside from the technology field could also be found in the utilities or in the energy market. In many countries, especially in certain areas within a country, you'll find that there is one energy provider that has the monopoly. They are the only essentially ruling powers within that area, and they are the only provider of energy within a certain geography. As a result, it's basically impossible for any other firm to get a foothold in this particular market. Slightly leaning more towards the competition side from a monopoly is monopolistic competition. And this is where many firms sell similar but not identical products. As a result, they have some control over pricing because they can differentiate their products. There are essentially small differences in their product offerings. It's not entirely different from what the entire market provides, but they are able to essentially set themselves apart just a little bit. Entry and exit barriers are much lower than in a monopoly, and there is much more competition on price and quality. So it's relatively easy in a market of monopolistic competition to enter this particular market because, for instance, there's not a lot of technological know-how that needs to be acquired or built up first in order to enter this market. But on the other hand, there are no significant long-run economic profits. A good example is the restaurant market. So obviously in any city you will find an abundance of restaurants, and they all partake in the monopolistic competition of that particular city. They are able to distinguish themselves a little bit because each restaurant has their own signature dishes, they have their own cuisine, they have their own style, etc. And these are relatively small changes compared to the entire restaurant market in this city, which they are able to set themselves apart or differentiate themselves with their products. But they are still not able to get a very significant foothold in the market because obviously there are many other restaurants that are essentially also vying for a share of this particular market. The last type of market structure is much more similar to a monopoly, and this is the oligopoly. But instead of one single firm that dominates the market, there are a few large firms, and they all produce similar or identical products. It's not entirely the same, there is some product differentiation, but generally speaking, these are relatively small differences compared to one another. A key feature of a oligopoly is that they are interdependent. In other words, each decision of one firm, that is a major decision of one firm, affects the entire market, and this runs the real risk of price leadership or collusion. And this is why governments keep a very strict eye on potential oligopolies forming, because they want to avoid the same risk that often materializes in a case of a monopoly, where a monopolist will essentially extort their own power in the market at the expense of consumers, because they capitalize on too high a profit at the expense of consumers. In other words, consumers spend more than they actually should. And there's a similar risk in the case of an oligopoly. What you quite often find if you open the newspapers is that there are companies that are essentially colluding together, they're collaborating, and they're setting up their own price schemes. Quite often, these firms will know ahead of time what another firm might do. And this is relevant to them because this affects the entire market. But by colluding, they can essentially maintain their own power positions, and they can maintain their own relatively small shares of the market size for their own. A very good example of oligopolies is the automobile market. You all know quite a few car manufacturers, but typically this is a relatively small number. We all know the Fords, the Toyotas, the Volkswagens, etc. But it's a relatively small supply of car manufacturers. This is a key example of an oligopoly. And just the fact that right now in 2024, there are so many new automobile manufacturers that are looking to develop electric cars, many of them have grown bankrupt over the past few years. And essentially what it comes down to is it's really difficult for them to get a foothold in this oligopolistic market structure of the car industry.